Right. We are in the enviable position of being the second to last panel, right? The second to last discussion. Thanks. It's great to be back. I see it's still snowing outside, so those of us who love endless winter, never summer, we are rejoicing. And those of us who hate droughts. So anyway, that's not why we're here. But this is the emerging role of foundations in public land recreation. We're looking forward to a great discussion here. To my left is the former governor of Montana, who served 2 terms from 2012 to 2020, Governor Steve Bullock, who's now the chair of the Foundation for America's Public Lands, a new organization we will be hearing more of, and Mary Mitsos, also from Montana, who is president and CEO of the National Forest Foundation, and will be kicking us off.
I never had people clap before I even spoke. Maybe I should just stop. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and I thought I'd start with just telling you a little bit about the National Forest Foundation because it is a brand that is not very well known. I think a lot of people know about the National Park Foundation and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, less about us, and even less about what Governor Bullock's going to talk about because they're brand new. So we are a congressionally authorized nonprofit to work with the Forest Service. We work on behalf of the American public to inspire personal and meaningful connections to national forests and grasslands. And I'm just going to cover briefly our current strategic plan because it'll speak to recreation. So we have, our board was essential in driving us to develop a very growth-oriented strategic plan. And it's not growth for growth's sake. It was growth so we could help meet the needs of the forests and the communities that surround them. So there's 3 big buckets. The first is our goal to triple the investments in forest restoration. Second is to triple our investments in recreation infrastructure. And the third is to triple the number of people who engage with the NFF. And you'll notice that recreation and forest restoration are both high on the list because they actually go together in a really big way. So we were asked to talk about 3 buckets, collaboration, funding, and policy. And I'll start on collaboration because it's a big part of what the National Forest Foundation does. To me, it's probably the most important tool in natural resource work because in none of the stuff that we do can we do it alone. And if you're not having conversations with people who think like you and don't think like you, we won't get to lasting solutions on the ground. And I'll just lay out a couple of reasons why I feel that way. I think we're to a point now in recreation where we have to be talking about having conversations and talking about planning cross-jurisdictional boundaries. It's no longer just about the Forest Service or BLM or a local community. How do we tie a recreation system together that benefits all? And there are things that you can do to decrease pressure on public lands and benefit local communities at the same time. And I think those are the kind of conversations we need to start having. And I'll give you one example. It's not in the West. We do a lot of work on Medewin National Tallgrass Prairie outside of Illinois. The designation on that tallgrass prairie is it's day use only. There are tons of people who would love to do overnight camping there. It's 60 miles south of Chicago. It's one of the biggest open spaces in the area. So we're beginning to work with the local communities that surround it and say, what can you provide that will increase the economic revenue that's coming to your communities and benefit Medewin at the same time. I also think we need to go beyond planning for what we had to what we will need in the future. And I don't think we know yet what we need. We need to start bringing in more diverse voices. One person's definition of overcrowding is another person's definition of a heck of a lot of fun. And how do you provide all those different experiences to what we need to be, not what we currently are? Because recreation on public lands is pretty darn white at the moment. And I don't think we can forget about wildfire. How many of you have hiked through a burn scar on a 90-degree day? It's not very pleasant, is it? So what can we do to decrease the severity and frequency of wildfires that also protect our recreation infrastructures? Earlier this morning, there was a bunch of talk about tragedy of the commons. I had to chuckle because I actually did, way back when, my graduate work on tragedy of the commons. And it's amazing the natural resource management systems that existed and managed commons well before we got to Western European scientific management. And I think we have a lot to learn from indigenous communities and through traditional ecological knowledge there. So funding, the big question. I'm probably not in agreement with some in the room. I don't think there will ever be enough tax dollars to pay for what we need. And I don't see any federal, state, or local agency that has the funds that they need to do the work. And that's where organizations like ours come in. We exist on putting together public-private partnerships and pooling resources to raise the funds that are necessary to get the job done. We raise those funds and then we put them out through either nonprofit partners or to contractors. And so that also helps spur the local economy. As we all know, the largest gap is in maintenance. GAOA was great, but it's not enough. I will talk about it again a little bit in the policy side of things, but it's just so ironic when after GAOA was passed, there were all of these statements that came out about now how the system is going to be fixed. And that's a really bad marketing and communications campaign because it makes it harder to go back later to say, it was only a drop in the bucket. And then I also think, I was really happy to hear Tracy Stone Manning talk about the marketing campaign that they're doing. We're going to embark on something similar because we need to have the public engaged, and everyone, right? These lands are only public because the public supports them. So we got to work now to make sure that in the future we have that public. And they should be engaged not just through having a heck of a lot of fun for free, but how do you create that connection that they can be engaged? And it doesn't have to be through money. It can be through stewardship work. It can be through conservation education, lots of different ways. And I would argue that if you love this amazing resource that we have, you need to pay for it if you can, and through more than just tax dollars. On the policy side of things, I need to state up front that we are a non-advocacy bipartisan organization, so the NFF doesn't advocate for anything except for national forest and grasslands. I guess I have to say that. I'm probably one of the few in the room who's not a big fan of additional legislation, and that's for 3 reasons. It's written, it's passed, the agencies write their rules and regulations, and what you thought you got in the beginning is rarely what you get in the end. There's some maybe clearer lanes and more authority, but it doesn't necessarily match intent. I will also say anymore, these systems are running on over 100 years of policy and legislation, and new legislation often conflicts with previous legislation, and that leaves it even more complicated for our agency partners to implement. So I think a better way is to think about what current legislation can be tweaked. It's not a sexy, bright, shiny object, but it's sometimes more effective. And that's where GAOA comes back in. It didn't take care of the backlog maintenance, still a lot more of it to do. Maybe we can get that to be like where we got the Land and Water Conservation Fund to eventually be permanently funded. Because I can tell you, as an organization that raises a lot of funds for public lands, maintenance is the hardest money to raise. No one really wants to pay for that. They want to pay for the new shiny. Another bill to think about if you're thinking about legislation is think about the Farm Bill. It has to be renewed every 5 years. It's not just about farms. There's a lot that is packed into that, including a huge section on forestry. And there are many groups who are now talking about adding some recreation issues to that bill. What else is needed? I would say we don't really know who is using our public lands, where they come from, what they want. We kind of know what they do. It's really hard to get that data, but that data is going to be, and this was talked about earlier, that data is really important in order for us to understand what needs to happen in the future. And I'll go back to collaboration again. All of us who are passionate about public lands and recreation, we need to collaborate on the message and send the same message. You know, there's leave no trace, there's tread lightly, there's recreate responsibly. All of those together can help, but only if we're not talking past one another. And then last, I'll say we all need to be better at honoring tribal homelands and working closely and authentically with tribes and indigenous populations. And that's a long road, but it's a very important one. And I'll close at that. Thank you very much.
So we're in a situation, so we've been hearing throughout the day, we're in a situation where we've got, and Mary just touched on it again, declining funding for all of the public lands management over the last few decades at a time, for reasons ranging from political to practical. We have a wildfire crisis, we have a forest restoration big issue going on, and so more of the agency's funding is going to wildfires, to name one thing, at a time of explosive growth in recreation and other challenges. So Governor Bullock is part of a new foundation for America's public lands. Where do you see these foundations fitting in?
No, thanks, Kirk, for underscoring all the problems we have. No, but it really is generally like it's a gift to actually be here surrounded by people that understand the value of these public lands to our economy and to our soul, right? Public lands, they're really our heritage, they're a birthright, they're one of our great equalizers, which means no matter the size of our checkbook, wherever we're from, we all own them. And they're ours. And each and every one of us is certainly shaped by memories that they have from public lands. The first date I went on with my former high school classmate Lisa, who's now my wife of 24 years, was on the South Hills on some public lands right outside of Helena. Or my 12-year-old son's first muley buck was harvested off public lands. I even think of this last panel when Ashley and Evan talk about Moab. 3 weeks ago, I took the 16 and 18-year-old kids down to Moab, or I joined my family after a couple days. Yeah, the first day there might have been a TikTok under delicate arches, but by day 3, as we were hiking on BLM lands, the phones weren't even along. Or my oldest daughter, who went to Scotland for a semester this year, and right before she was going to go, she goes, "Dad, I want you to take me fishing." I'm like, "Yeah, but I love fishing, but you won't catch a damn thing." So I hired a guide. We had this just amazing day on the Missouri River, and drinking a beer with the guides afterwards, and I run into somebody I hadn't seen in a few years. He goes, "Yeah, it was a rough day fishing." And one of the old guys just sips his beer and he goes, "That's why you hire a guide." But look, whether it's falling in love on that picnic or getting your first hunt, really, that these are the memories that shape and define us as Westerners, as Americans. And as we've discussed throughout the day, it's more than just what's good for our soul, right? It's also good for the overall economy. Montana alone, right? Recreation economy, 71,000 jobs, $7.1 billion a year consumer spending. Nationally, $887 billion in consumer spending, 7.6 million American jobs. The economic value, certainly, of outdoor recreation is nothing to take for granted. And we need to be enhancing those opportunities, certainly not detracting them. Remember, Theodore Roosevelt, a whole long time ago, said, right, of all the questions which can come before this nation, short of actual preservation of its existence in a great war, there's none which compares to the importance of that great central task of leaving this land an even better land for our descendants than it is for us. Think about what we've inherited from those who came before us. Setting aside these public lands is one of America's great ideas. And I think the foundations really do have that critical role in helping pay it forward. Kirk said that I have the good fortune, right, of serving as the chair of the Foundation for America's Public Lands, congressionally authorized foundation. In some respects, it might not be deemed that good a fortune. Other foundations have been around for decades. We've been around about a year. Hell, one of the first things I had to do is, all right, Bullock, go to your staff and open up a checking account. We don't have any staff, so I had to figure out how to do that. What American can't name their favorite national park? What child doesn't think Smokey Bear is so cuddly and cute? In contrast, 30% of Americans don't even know what the Bureau of Land Management is. As it relates to conservation and outdoor recreation, the BLM has far too often been kind of deemed the Rodney Dangerfield of public land agencies. Yeah, think about it though. As the Director Stone Manning said, the Bureau cares for 1 in 10 acres across this country. Those lands welcome more than 80 million visitors a year, host 25 national monuments, support 374,000 jobs. We have work to do, and I'm so enthusiastic about it because the role the foundation can play in supporting those lands and the mission of the land agencies is so critical. The obvious is certainly economic, right? We ought to be able to say, and we can all turn around and say, outdoor recreation and the industry support it, contribute $65 billion a year in federal taxes, $62 billion a year in state and local revenues. One might think there's little need for a foundation to support the Bureau or outdoor recreation on our public lands. Recognize, though, that the BLM stewards all facets of these lands with an annual budget of $1.7 billion a year. As the director said, right, that the BLM gets some 79 cents federal funding for every visitor compared to $5.20 allocated to the Park Service. So the role of the foundation is a necessity. Just as each of us probably at one time or another chipped in to help buy our teachers, our kids' teachers, some of their supplies, those foundations must play a role to fill in some of the gaping holes our policymakers fail to. But I think the value proposition of foundation in supporting public lands and outdoor recreation is so much greater than just this sort of idea of a collective bake sale, right? I've spent the majority of my professional life in public service, and I don't regret a single day. Yet I also recognize the limitations of government. Government can move pretty damn slow at times. Its threshold for accepting failure is much less. It strives for inclusiveness, yet paradoxically can be difficult to access. And government is certainly at times its own worst advocate or cheerleader. As a partner, philanthropy can make up for some of those inherent limitations of government. Philanthropy is more than just about funding. When aligned with an agency, philanthropic funding can act as a way to test and learn. Funded projects and programs then can rapidly test those ideas, seek proof points, gather data. If a solution is viable, philanthropy can demonstrate what it could mean to bring those solutions to scale. We can fail where government can't. Philanthropy can also shine a light, convene conversations, create that groundswell of support. Philanthropy can inspire. and it can demonstrate to policymakers that they should be funding our priorities because we have skin in the game. Well, we're only about a year out in creating this foundation. We're hitting the ground running. 3 of our inaugural programs include first awareness. As the director mentioned, Mayor said, so we're creating and launching a comprehensive multi-year campaign celebrating the value of public lands, educating the public, lifting the importance of the BLM and those incredible public servants that have chosen to dedicate their career to the Bureau, in highlighting sort of keeping those lands safe and open. Ultimately, that informed public will support and rally around places and services that they understand, recognize, and value. Kim Cross on the last panel said it better than I've ever heard it in my life. You can't save what you don't love, and you can't love what you don't know. Second, we're working on restoration. We're leveraging funds from the Inflation Reduction Act to support long overdue restoration work in the Colorado River Basin, vital source of water, habitat, and recreation opportunities for millions of people across the western U.S. By working with local communities and stakeholders, we're confident our restoration efforts will certainly make meaningful headway, improving water quality, enhancing fish and wildlife habitat, promoting sustainable land use practices that support and really the health and resilience of that entire region. And then third, finally, outdoor recreation. The director mentioned that the Bureau's been working on sort of updating what is this outdoor recreation vision. We're pleased to be actually getting to work with the BLM to refine the agency's outdoor recreation strategy, ensure it aligns with the needs and desires of the various communities that it serves. And effective, really, collaboration and stakeholder engagement, that's critical for successful outdoor recreation programs and initiatives. In the coming months, we at the Foundation, we're going to host a series of roundtable discussions with our partners to gather insights, share ideas, identify opportunities for innovation and improvement. And that really can help provide that connective tissue between communities and the agency and the community partners. And we're going to produce a public-facing report to synthesize the feedback and then initiate a grant program that funds some of the solutions identified from those roundtables to advance great opportunities from proof points, advanced storytelling. Our goal really is to enhance the quality and diversity of outdoor recreation. We have about 27 other different projects we hope to get going, but first we got to actually finish building the plane and take off. And I hope that at the end of the day, you all would join in our crusade, right? Just as we each have ownership in public lands, I'd love for you to each think that you have ownership in the Foundation for America's Public Lands and its successes. If you're a corporate or philanthropic venture or know some that might be interested, please join us as a partner. If you do on the ground work, one of the exciting things about this is we really are excited about the opportunity to look forward to partnering with you. So again, so appreciate you being here through a long day. Greater appreciate your commitment to public lands, your commitment to ensuring that these foundations are part of what really is paying it forward along the way.
Okay. You guys may not, well, need not be reminded at this point, but I'm sure you have questions, and so you know the drill. Write the questions down on the sheets of paper, and they will magically be delivered to me, the gatekeeper. I think maybe to just kick this topic off, or kick the discussion off a little bit, I was thinking of this whole quandary or situation or opportunity about foundations stepping up where land agencies just can't anymore due to a myriad of factors. And a couple of years ago, I hope nobody dissects, maybe they've heard some of my stories, but I hope nobody dissects them too closely, otherwise they might realize that a lot of my winter stories happen within about an hour or so's drive of ski resorts. So. But I was in Mammoth Lakes, California, where they were, it reminds me I need to check back in with them because they were dealing with huge crowds pre-pandemic, so I don't even know what's been happening since. But these gateway communities, they were considering taxing themselves to deal with just trash pickup at pinch points. All the National Forest trailheads that ring the town and the ski area and the BLM access that's around the town. But I think it was mentioned earlier on the previous panel from the speaker from Moab, is this not the country's job? Should local communities have to be stepping up like this? Should the former uranium mining town, is it their responsibility? Is this not a national issue? I know, Mary, you said that it's just not coming back, the funding isn't coming back. So is my premise of the question, I guess, impractical?
I think the funding can definitely increase if we all work together, and that would be an amazing thing. My point is, no matter how much tax money we have, it will still not be enough. And that is true of every agency, natural resource or not. So if that is never going to be enough, how do you augment that? And generally, that's augmented through philanthropy. I mean, one of the things that we do really well is pooling different sorts of funds, be it state and local government, foundation, corporation, individual, and reporting back to those donors about what their dollars achieved. And it is really gratifying to have these corporations be really excited about investing in public lands because they know their customers recreate there. So it's a good story for them as well.
And Governor Bullock, I mean, you also mentioned, I think, not to totally go back on the premise of my own question, but you did mention that the Inflation Reduction Act and other funding mechanisms do sort of channel through foundations like yours. So the public is actually funding in a way still.
Through partnership with the Bureau, we are going to have both the opportunity to use some of that money, but then what we can do is leverage that money with the private side. I think back to my little Moab hike, and what are those sort of trail stewards called? They don't work for the BLM.
No, they're called trail. They work for the county.
Yeah.
Program.
Like, I have this great conversation with someone, I'm like, I didn't want to say, I'm part of the Foundation for America's Public Lands. But I'm like, oh, you must be a BLM employee. He goes, no, I get paid by the county. Like, what a cool partnership. But I think at the end of the day, and it's not just the Inflation Reduction Act money. I mean, in part, I was at a conference on youth mental health last week in Georgia, and one of the speakers said, we have to hold elected officials accountable so they'll provide the money. And this former elected official, no, like everybody says, we got to hold you accountable. But what we can do is use those philanthropic dollars, demonstrate, I'll be damned, if you actually have good markings on trailheads in one community, what a difference it can make on not loving these lands to death. And once we do that with philanthropic dollars, then it's easier to make the case to say, all right, federal government, look at what we can do in helping preserve these 224 million or however many acres. 245, damn it. You can tell I'm just a year into this. The 245 million acres. So I think if we view it as using private dollars to help educate policyholders, to demonstrate that the constituency's there because people are using their own private money to do this. Look, back to the initial premise of your question, I do think that the federal government ought to pay for this. But I'm also living in the real world where we need to make sure we're demonstrating, we're making the case, the proof points to get them to fund further.
Okay, so we have a question. In our real world, we have a lot of crises right now. I don't have to tell this room, and a lot of problems to fix. So I guess it's a question for both of you. Does it seem like these foundations are competing for the same money? And do these public lands foundations work with each other? So we happen to have two right here, so we can see this in action. Is this true? Is there a coordination?
Well, let me go to your first question first, because it's not just congressionally authorized nonprofits. It's every nonprofit that's here that competes with this for the same dollars. And that is a fact of the nonprofit world. I can't speak for the Foundation for America's Public Lands, but for us, we can actually help alleviate that competition by working with the local partners and raising funds with and for them that we give back to them. And that builds their capacity as well. There's been attempts to work more closely with the National Park Foundation and National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. It really can't happen at the corporate level, in my opinion. It has to happen by people on the ground working together. And so once you all are up and running, I sure as heck hope we'll be working together.
Yeah, and I guess I'd add two things to that. So we had our first partial, because we haven't even filled out the whole board, but board retreat. And to kick it off, right before we went and looked at some Bureau of Land Management lands, we actually said, Mary, will you take us or go out to lunch with us? I don't think we made you pay, did we? We don't have a lot of money yet. But so we can learn from it. So I think the way we need to think of this is that, look, we've talked about the wonders of this outdoor recreation industry alone. Like, we ought to be expanding the pie for private dollars, not trying to take from one another. And I think Mary's point is dead on, and done right, like this foundation, what this will be is a partner for friends groups. Ways to bring dollars and sort of attention to things. So, look, whoever gets the credit, if we're doing good work on BLM lands, that's greater investment by people in these lands. It's greater investment by communities in these lands, and ultimately too by Congress in these lands.
Mary, maybe to you, I was talking about all the crises, so let's talk about something good. I wondered if you might, I kind of hate questions like this when I get them, but because they put you on the spot. But if you have a place that's maybe a project that worked well, that you might shine a light on, that's maybe not in the ski town, not in the Mammoth Lakes, maybe in a more rural or underserved community that you think this room might, the folks in this room and elsewhere might want to look at as a model to replicate elsewhere.
Well, the thing I don't like about the question is the question about models, because I don't think there are really models. There are things that we can replicate and learn, but every local community and every local unit is different, and what you do there needs to fit that culture and the needs of the landscape and communities. When I'm asked that question, I always go to my favorite project that isn't out west. Is that a fair one?
Sure.
So
tend to focus only, not only, but a lot of times we're talking about the West because, of course, this is where most of the public land is.
Yeah, so one of my favorite projects is, and I don't know how many of you even know that the Forest Service manages a national tallgrass prairie. It's 60 miles south of Chicago, little known within the system and not at all known within Chicago. Largest open space within the Chicagoland area, and a vastly underutilized resource. So we've been working there for, 15, 20 years to actually bring back the tallgrass prairie. There is less than 1% of the original habitat of tallgrass prairies in this country. And I tell you, they are absolutely amazing when you walk through them. So we're doing the restoration. We are getting youth from Chicago more engaged and giving them work opportunities down there. And the most fun was to reintroduce a conservation herd of bison at the prairie 60 miles south of Chicago. It's been a heck of a lot of fun.
Sounds like a pretty good model.
As far as the best project we've done so far, stay tuned.
Okay. So staying with Governor Bullock, this is a question directed to him from the audience. Could be a softball, we'll find out. But it is about a controversial topic, and that is, certainly in some circles, that is the Good Neighbor Authority, which does give some tools to local land managers that may not have been there before, but to address some public lands conflicts over the years. So, should we expand the Good Neighbor Authority so states can maintain and build recreational facilities, like what has been going on with the Good Neighbor Authority since 2016 for mostly just forestry projects? Should that be expanded into outdoor rec?
Yeah, and Governor Little had mentioned his predecessor, Butch Otter, and I had worked on sort of GNA on the forest side. I think they were the first state, we were the second. I think any time that you can have partnerships from a federal and state, in addition to like federal and philanthropic, it can provide incredible opportunities. Like, never forget hearing some of the challenges with the Forest Service and saying, well, I as governor, I can bring some resources to this. And then you're building further trust and opportunity. So I do think, like, looking at it from an outdoor rec perspective, as long as it's still consistent with sort of the mission and the terms of what, in my instance for this foundation, that the Bureau is seeking, like, what a great opportunity. So I think that looking at GNA in other areas could be something worth taking a look at.
But what if it were to happen in a county that may have a history of strong anti-federal government sentiment, or local county commissioners who have been on the record as saying they don't think the U.S. government ought to be in their counties? I mean, is this a way to start bridging those old wounds?
Yeah, I think back to last time, actually, which is pathetic because you have a beautiful city. The last time I was in Boise, Governor Andrus had called me and said, will you please come out and speak at the, this deal? And it was 6 or 7 years ago. And so much of the discussion then was about the transfer of federal lands movement. Like, right, all these folks in the West saying, we're going to take all these lands back because the federal government can't do a damn thing with them, right? 6, 7 years later, I think we've progressed in a lot of ways. I think part of it is, not all of it, is outdoor recreation, recognizing what it can mean to a small rural community. Part of it is certainly where we've been able to have on-the-ground collaborative partnerships. There's a part of it, I never thought I would quote Taylor Swift, but the hater's gonna hate, right? You're not gonna be able to get everybody along the line, and in some of these counties, but at that point, guess what? You may not end up having a project. But let's actually then highlight where there is great federal, state, local. Shine that out, because some people say politics is, right, first of all, it's local, but it's also deeply personal. And when you can get people that don't necessarily agree on everything, but agree on the importance of this recreation site or this federal land and what it's actually doing for that county and community, when you can have those exemplars to show up and shine up, I think it helps even those places that are still saying, get the federal government out of my county.
In fact, wasn't it here in Boise in 1980 or so that the term sagebrush rebel may have been coined by a certain former governor of California? Maybe historians in the room know about that?
It was 1977. No, I actually don't know.
Okay. Mary, do you want to add anything, clean up to that last question? Have we forgotten what the question was?
I did, and he's a hard act to follow.
Well, I have another pointed question that I did not write that is directed to you that may put you on the spot, but I think you'll enjoy to answer it. Can you describe the most successful grant given by the National Forest Foundation? What did it do, and why was it successful? And I don't know my acronyms here as well as I should, but what might FAPL grants look like? Whoever wrote that could chime in.
I don't know.
I think that we're trying to get away from calling it FAPL, the Foundation for America's Public Lands, but I think that's
Oh.
so don't ever call that again, and whoever wrote that question, knock it
So
off.
I guess it's for both of you.
Yeah,
but yeah.
so most of it's for Mary, then.
Now it will always be FAPL in our minds.
No,
Sorry.
no.
Okay, so explaining the most successful grant in NFF history is like asking me to say what's my favorite national forest and grassland. Can't do it. Because it depends on what you're trying to achieve, how much it cost, outcomes on the landscape, where it occurred, who was involved. There's so many things that go along with that. Some of the work that we've done, I can talk about grants in big buckets. Some of the work that we've done early on, we did a lot of capacity building grants for nascent collaboratives and nonprofits working with the Forest Service. And we actually have one of our participants that received one of those first grants and helped build muscle to work in a nonprofit world and partner with the Forest Service. And she's still at it today. So I would say that's a big success. But it's not about size. It's really about, I think the most successful grants are those that authentically engage people in the stewardship and enjoyment of our public land system, because that just helps build where we're going in the future.
Yeah, and I think when I look at what sort of the grants and the potential for the Foundation for America's Public Lands will be is, look, coming out of this, we're gonna have convenience on the outdoor recreation vision. I would love to see some small grants where somebody said, if we only had better trail markers somewhere, and we can make a difference in that community. I'd love to see opportunistic, what I'll call opportunistic funding. Somebody turns around and says, wouldn't it be great to have a visitor center at X, Y, and Z? Well, we're probably not gonna get that money from the federal government. But if we can raise that money, you're gonna have a visitor center that generations will enjoy. And then also conservation. When you're in charge of 1 out of 10 of every acre in the US, there's a lot of work to do. And you can't always rely necessarily on the federal government to do it. But if we can do it in partnership, that's a multiplier for what federal dollars that we can get.
So we have another question. There's still a little bit of time for questions if you've got that. Questions about anything. No, I'm kidding.
Wait, don't tell me. Oh no, that's NPR.
There's $20. So this is to what you guys have just been talking about in terms of grant money. We've been talking about many projects that need and deserve funding in an era where there's just less funding to go around. The question is, federal maintenance backlogs are huge. We don't even have to, I know my audience, the National Park Service, among other things. So the question is, how do you all prioritize, even begin to prioritize, which projects should get funded?
So we work two different ways. One, we have a competitive grants program. It used to be the biggest part of what we do. It's now a very important but smaller in our overall scope of work. What gets prioritized there is what local nonprofits apply for, right? Because they're the ones that know the priorities in their local units, communities, whatever. They know the priorities best. On our other work, it's philanthropy. You are driven by where you can find the money. And that doesn't come close to making sure that everybody has equitable access to resources. But I think another thing that foundations can do is really bring in individuals to support these systems. And when you can do that, and I'm not talking individuals at the $1 million level, I'm talking about 1 million individuals given $10. When that happens, then you can begin to invest in places that are under-resourced and don't have the philanthropic support that they need to do what they want to do.
Yeah, I think a couple different areas, one of which is at times I think foundations can gap fill. Like actually I look forward to working with the Bureau and saying, what's missing from what you can do and what can we bring to the table? And whether it's $1 million $10 donations or 10 $1 million donations, like there really does become what I call opportunistic funding, right? That I know that there are people out there that really have the drive to do more, be it outdoor recreation or conservation on these public lands, or the Bureau of Land Management lands. Do you like how also in naming this, we co-opted every other land management agencies?
No.
Oh, sorry about that. Sorry. It looks good on a water bottle though. But to turn around, right, from the perspective of saying, not only what does the agency want to do, but what's complementary to the agency that private dollars want to do. And if we can bring those private dollars to the table, it'll make it much easier. And candidly, I think much quicker. When I was saying I was in government for a while, that like, I don't know what it would take if the Bureau wanted to go out and have 7 listening sessions. Would you have to notice it in the Federal Registry, stuff like that? We can actually move quicker, presumably, and that's not to say that the agency doesn't try to move damn quick, it's just, this is government. We can move quicker on both getting the stakeholders engaged and hopefully also getting some of the money out the door.
What role do you guys think that foundations like yours might play in restoring trust in former natural resource dependent communities, maybe current natural resource dependent communities who are looking to expand into outdoor rec or already did? Is there a role for you guys to play there?
Absolutely, yes, and that's why all conservation needs to be local. And it's a big part of why collaboration is important as well. In a sense, we become kind of a translator for the agency. Don't have to necessarily speak about NEPA or FLIPMA or whatever, MUSI. You think of the acronyms that these agencies use. And we use them too, but usually not when we're speaking to the public. But yes, we have a large role in that, and we are a respected, neutral partner that can bring very diverse perspectives to the room and help them realize their common ground. And I stress realize their common ground because there is a lot of common ground. It's just too much time is spent talking past one another instead of talking with one another.
Yeah, I think they can play a critical role. Now I'll go back to, again, the land transfer movement. If you even think 6 or 7 years ago, the people that finally stood up and said, no, we don't do this, made for a pretty diverse group of folks, right? Like, how many times did I hear, you're a Democrat? I don't like Democrats, but I don't want to see those lands go away. So if we think of it, the threats of losing something can bring people together. The opportunity to create something can bring people together too. The funding of those trailheads, the recognition of a visitor center, the ability to take areas that may not be doing that well, and we know the impact of outdoor rec already, but if we can help assist and enhance that, it's only going to build that much greater trust.
Yeah, there was a Republican legislator in my first job in Montana who was a goat farmer. He was quite the character. He used to take me aside and be like, oh, don't tell anybody, but I listen to you guys. So we have just a couple minutes left. I'm curious if he still does. Do you see opportunities to tie foundations to the 50-year Bureau of Land Management anniversary and the FLIPMA Act and the 250-year birthday of the USA in 2026? Sorry, that was a terribly read question, but I think...
No, it was a perfect question because I understood exactly. Thank you, Karen. Right, so the Bureau of Land Management is going to have an anniversary. FLIPMA, which Federal Land Management Policy Act, so like saying FAPL, don't say FLIPMA either, is about to have an anniversary in this country. Like, now that we're up and running, to look at these things had the opportunity with the Wyoming governor, Secretary Jewell, to celebrate the Park Service anniversary at the Gateway of Yellowstone. And how cool was that? Just like what had been created over a century and what we had. I think that really can anchor as we go forward after we get the first 4 or 5 priorities going to say, here's something now. Because the other thing with these, and I think I should underscore that Mary noted, look, the importance of these foundations transcend politics. Like, I do care who's president or whatever a decade from now. But what I hope is no matter sort of where someone is on the political spectrum, they turn around and say, this is a great partner to local communities, to our lands, to the federal government. So anchoring in some of the exciting things that we can celebrate, like I'm also looking forward to, even before we get to that, the notion that 30% of America, I don't know what the Bureau of Land Management is, like we've got to get over that and then actually use that as an anchor to bring in both for projects, for funding and awareness.
Okay, so before we get to wrap up, we'll try to get as many questions in as possible, so maybe Mary, take a quick stab at this before we do wrap up and mop up. It would seem that localized planned giving could be a significant opportunity, given your federal reach. A philanthropic question, has this mechanism been considered or designed yet? That is, designated gifts, targeted giving.
Yes, but as a nonprofit who really, we all succeed better with flexible funding. When we work with donors who want to leave a legacy gift, we try to encourage them to make sure it is unrestricted and national and trust us to spend their money well, unless it is a big enough gift to make a difference. And if it is, a $5 million gift for the Umpqua National Forest, we'll make it work.
Okay, well, it's been a great discussion. Maybe just to put you on the spot, as you wrap up, when was the last time you recreated on public lands?
Wah, wah, wah.
Oh no, you've been working too much.
Yes.
If you live in Boise, it's very easy. You can just take a walk outside. But I think many of you do live in similar places.
I live in Montana, and I'd like to say I do it every day, and I should do it every day, but I don't. I need to do better.
Also, anything to wrap up before we pass to the governor?
Oh, no, I just, a pleasure being here, and I'm the first one to say philanthropy is not the answer. It is an answer as we all work together. And so support your public foundations.
It snowed October 23rd in Montana, and until 4 days ago, there was still snow on the ground. So when I got off the plane like at 11 this morning, I'm like, what the hell's happening here in Boise? But we had 3 days of warmth, so I actually went trail running on public lands. And again, right, that's within a half mile from where I live. So this is sort of the foundation of what my kids, I love the fact that kids that are 16, 18, and 20 say, let's go hiking. And it's because they had that opportunity. So we're regular users, and I'll just close with, I do think foundations play a critical role. And I don't want to be like, when I was growing up, Jerry Lewis had a telethon, right? Like, give it, 1-800 blah, blah, blah. But recognize that the success of these foundations truly are your success. It's not some outside entity, just like those public lands aren't somebody else's lands. So get engaged. If you know folks that want to do it, I think americaslands.org or something like that is the website that we've set up. I would love to turn around, and I think I'm on, Governor Little had been here 5 times. I'm on like a 6 or 7 year cycle where I'm only allowed back after 6 or 7 years. I'd love to be able to come back in 7 years and whoever the chair is and the like, I said, look at what we all collectively helped create. And it really is all of us. So really appreciate your interest and engagement.